Kristyan will be speaking on his own behalf always, and he is talking today about Israel and Palestine. A durable peace must be based on human rights and justice. Kristyan Benedict manages Amnesty International UK's crisis response programme, focusing on armed conflict, mass repression, and UK foreign policy. His work has involved working with and supporting activists and human rights defenders from a range of countries and regions, including Israel and Palestine. And he's working on this topic at a very high level and with us very closely since early 2000, with a particular focus on justice and accountability and developing the End Israeli Apartheid Campaign. So we're really lucky and very excited to have you today, Kristyan. I will be handing over to you and I'll come back for the Q&A. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope sound is okay. All
It's
good.
perfect.
So hi everyone, and thanks to the Balfour Project for hosting me, and Deanna, Laura, and their colleagues organizing this event with, I would hope, should be a relatively uncontroversial title: A Durable Peace Must Be Based on Human Rights and Justice. Well, uncontroversial maybe, but there is certainly not unanimity whether that regards human rights and justice being the foundation for durable peace, or whether there should be peace between Israelis and Palestinians at all. Because frankly, we'd be there now if there was enough agreement on the need for peace. But we are where we are, and the current reality is extremely grim and dangerous for civilians in the region, and a threat to the structures of international justice, accountability, and the laws designed to protect civilians. Which means the current reality is dangerous for all of us. But, this may seem an odd thing to say, but the current reality, it's also ripe with opportunities for progress towards that durable peace. It's always darkest before dawn. Now, October 7th, 2023, that was nearly 300 days ago. That horrific escalation of the crisis in Israel, in Gaza, and the wider occupied Palestinian territory has been catastrophic for civilians, especially Palestinian civilians. An immediate ceasefire by all parties is, of course, desperately needed. And victims, survivors, and their families deserve justice. These are two vital ingredients towards peace. Now, of course, a ceasefire on its own is only a starting point. We mustn't forget what the abysmal reality was like, especially for Palestinians, on and before October the 6th, 2023. A failure to recognize the deep structural issues that drive the crisis will mean we will never get out of this man-made disaster. And in fact, let's look at the news right now. It may well escalate wider with cataclysmic consequences on civilians in the region. So whilst there are there is a moment of possibility where international justice is moving at the ICC and ICJ. There are talks of the new diplomatic process emerging, and the new UK government is saying they want to return to a peace process. We mustn't lose sight that we are in a truly dangerous moment. So that's why it's crucial to impress upon our government that the most recent escalation of violence and violations, like others before it, is rooted in decades of illegal occupation, annexation, apartheid, impunity, and failures to center human rights in any so-called peace agreements. Ignoring or dismissing this would be extremely dangerous. From Amnesty International's perspective, these are the key drivers of the crisis. But I say again, not everybody's going to agree with this. That's putting it mildly. So we've, of course, communicated with the new government, ministers and officials, outlining our position and reasoning for why we believe the UK government must, to use their favourite word, change and begin to centre respect for human rights and international justice in its emerging policy towards Israelis and Palestinians. In particular, in this first 100 days phase, we're currently calling on the UK to support international justice. That means championing the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice in all cases, including acting on all rulings and recommendations from the ICJ and executing possible ICC arrest warrants for all suspected perpetrators. And to stop bombing Israel. That means immediately suspending the direct and indirect supply, sale, or transfer of all weapons, munitions, and other military and security equipment. Now, these are just the immediate priorities. The government is, of course, already publicly insisting on other measures we have long advocated since this latest phase of the crisis escalated, such as the need for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of civilians used as hostages, and of course, massive increases in aid. There's, of course, much more we want to see the government do, and have advocated for these points long before actually the recent ICJ advisory opinion. For instance, we want to see the government introduce and enforce a ban on products from Israeli settlements in the UK and regulate companies in the UK to prohibit their operations in the settlements or trade with settlement goods. We want to see them exercising universal jurisdiction in investigating any person in the UK who may reasonably be suspected of committing crimes against humanity or other crimes under international law. And I can't stress this enough. It's crucial for peace now and the long term that there is no immunity from prosecution for such crimes. And then, of course, we have the big asks where we're pressing the UK government, where we want them to use all their political and diplomatic tools to help finally end Israel's illegal occupation and dismantle its system of apartheid. And as their thinking develops to the long term, we want them to ensure that human rights are central to all bilateral and multilateral agreements with the parties, including by exercising effective due diligence to ensure these don't contribute in any way to maintaining Israel's illegal occupation or system of apartheid. Now, of course, each one of these recommendations can be broken down into dozens of indicators of progress. This isn't easy. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy. But ending the occupation would mean restoring Palestinians' rights by lifting the blockade on Gaza, dismantling Israeli settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and reversing its illegal annexation. It would allow Palestinians to move freely in the areas where they live and allow families to be reunited. It would alleviate mass suffering and end wide-scale human rights violations. It would also contribute to tackling one of the root causes of the recurrent violence and war crimes against Israelis, so helping to improve human rights protections and secure justice and reparation for victims on all sides. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, this is never going to happen. I think that's understandable. I won't pretend it's easy. It isn't easy. But, neither is sending humans into space. This really is not beyond human imagination or capacity. So to reiterate, for any hope of justice on long-term peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis, the roots of this decades-long crisis need to be comprehensively addressed. And it's not just logistical hurdles. For instance, the gargantuan challenge of dismantling some 300 illegal Israeli settlements and outposts in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and evacuating over 700,000 Israeli settlers, there's also the many, many arguments the Israeli authorities and their supporters will be lobbying the new government with right now. And they can be extremely persuasive. But all their primary arguments are rooted in a disrespect for core human rights principles. Now, for a UK government that says human rights will be foundational to everything it does, well, these arguments should be rejected, shouldn't they? We'll see. So, for instance, Israel's government and its backers will invoke security, but it's a security based on domination and discrimination of Palestinians. They'll also state their opposition to a Palestinian state, but so as to justify an illegal occupation and ongoing annexation. The security or self-defense argument is extremely persuasive, understandably so. But the best route to comprehensive security, i.e. not just in the interests of the more powerful party, Israel, but for everyone, remains respecting international law. This is true now, as it was 30 years ago and before. It means, and this is the hard part for so many people, it means seeing Palestinians as human and with rights, and ridding our foreign policy of toxic double standards and racism. It means accepting that security cannot be maintained through the imposition of a system of apartheid, through committing crimes under international law with impunity, or the perpetual deprivation of the rights of Palestinians under permanent and illegal occupation. We have decades of evidence to prove that point, not just going back to Oslo, but well before. Previous attempts to resolve this entrenched crisis have failed, quite miserably and predictably, precisely because respect for human rights, especially the human rights of Palestinians, have not been made central to negotiations and agreements. So our message to the UK government is quite simple. A just and durable peace requires a plan that prioritizes the human rights of all Palestinians and all Israelis. That means an effective political solution must meet key human rights benchmarks. Negotiating parties, Israeli and Palestinian, agree on some basic principles, namely, everybody has the right to life. No one should be subjected to torture. No one should be subjected to arbitrary arrest and detention. Everyone has the right to a fair trial. All persons are free and equal in dignity and rights. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement. Everyone has the right to return to his or her country. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, opinion, and expression. And there should be no impunity for human rights abuses. All of that means guaranteeing equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis, upholding victims' rights on all sides to justice and full reparation, ensuring the removal of illegal settlements and the evacuation of settlers, ending the illegal occupation, including lifting the blockade on Gaza, dismantling Israel's system of apartheid, and respecting the right to return. We are really far from this reality, really far. But compromising on or ignoring some or all of these principles will not bring peace. That is guaranteed. And as I said, we have decades of evidence to prove this point. So take this as a recipe for genuine security, stability, and peace over injustice, criminality, and chaos. And I reiterate, and I understand, not everyone agrees, to put it mildly, such as the tragedy of this crisis. I will say that I was heartened to read the Balfour Project's action plan for the new UK government at their conference in London some weeks back. There's a huge amount in there that Amnesty does agree with, especially where the plan states the underlying causes must be addressed, and the universality of international law and the need for accountability for those who breach it must be reasserted. Absolutely, 100%. Ending the complicity in war crimes, including arms transfers, banning settlement goods, support for the ICC and ICJ, absolutely, 100%. And when the Balfour Project says the credibility of international law is at stake, I couldn't agree more. Because as I suggested earlier, we are in a watershed moment for the international global system, with people globally paying the price for flagrant rule breaking by governments and corporate actors, Palestinians in particular, who are the absolute sharp end of a genocidal assault. Israel's flagrant disregard for international law is, of course, compounded by the failures of its main allies. In the first instance, the USA, but also the UK, certainly the previous government. It's their failure to condemn Israel's violations, end their complicity, and help stop the horrendous civilian bloodshed in Gaza. So you see, it's not just civilians under attack, it's also international law and the global system designed to protect us all. As Raja Shahada recently said, will international law finally prevail and serve as an instrument for bringing lasting peace in the region? Well, the new UK government has taken some initial positive steps on, for instance, removing the pause on funding to UNRWA and not going ahead with the challenge to the ICC's jurisdiction regarding arrest warrants against Israelis. And as I said, they are talking about engaging in a new peace process. And at the international level, we've seen major moves at the ICC and ICJ. The ICJ issued its recent opinion, and the conclusion was loud and clear. Israel's occupation and annexation of the Palestinian territories are unlawful, and its discriminatory laws and policies against Palestinians violate the prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid. And this is on top of the provisional measures already ordered by the courts, including for Israel to refrain from acts under the Genocide Convention. And hopefully we will see arrest warrants issued from the ICC, hopefully this year. So taken together, these moves give us all an opportunity, including seasoned civil servants, to reflect on the human rights violations of not just the past 300 days, but the past 30 years and longer, to acknowledge that serious mistakes have been made at the political and diplomatic level, and to commit themselves to ensure that there actually will be full respect for human rights in the future. So our challenge to bring about genuine, durable peace is to end the lawlessness, end the impunity, end the double standards, end the discrimination, ensure there is consistency, and ensure there is justice and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristyan. We've got some very interesting questions coming through. As always, I tell our speakers not to worry looking at the chat box. I will send it to them afterwards, but do post any comments or questions you have in there, and we'll try to get through as many as possible. I do want to just say that I noticed Tony Klug is in our audience, and he is speaking at an event tomorrow at the Initiatives of Change with one of our trustees, Imad. So I am going to pop the link in the chat box. It is a hybrid event. I don't know if they've got tickets available for their in person, to attend in person, but they will definitely have availability to attend online. It's in the evening. So please do check that out. And thank you, Tony, for joining us today. So do post some questions in the chat box and we will get through as many as possible. I've got one from Jeffrey Alderman. Does the speaker, that's you, Kristyan, accept the legality of Jewish settlements that predated the Ottoman conquest of Palestine? For example, Hebron. It's quite
Well, Amnesty will, I mean, Amnesty operates within applicable international law and where its policies are. So when we're calling for the end to the occupation, we're talking about the military occupation with regards to international law. So that is, we're talking about the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. And as I said, not everybody's going to agree with that. Other people will say, well, you know, this is Judea and Samaria and this was promised to us, and et cetera, et cetera. There will be views from many, many sides. Our side is with regards to international law. And we have been calling for the evacuation of the settlements for many, many years, a long, long time. So it's good to see the International Court of Justice last week, some days ago, also coming out with a very, very strong advisory opinion. If you haven't seen that, you don't need to read the full version. You can read the press release. It's very clear, it's very unequivocal, and I touched on it in my talk. The occupation must end. So yes, there are political, religious, cultural claims and counterclaims, but we are operating according to applicable international law, and that's it. Others will have a different opinion, and that's why this is a complicated situation, unless people choose to agree that international law supporting human rights and justice is the route, as I said, to a durable peace. There was millions of questions which are variations on that question that has been posed. So that would be the same answer to every single one of them.
We've got Claire Walford and a couple of other people who are asking specifically how Hamas leaders should be treated under international law, any accountability they need to be held to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And that's why we have long called for the International Criminal Court to investigate the situation. And once the investigation started, to expedite it. And once that started, to move quickly with arrest warrants for all parties. And it's positive at the moment. There are applications for 3 Hamas leaders. We want to see progress on that. What we would say is, you know, there is no chance of any domestic justice and accountability happening. And that's why you need the international courts coming into this. So they should be held to account in the same way that Israeli officials and military and political leaders are held to account. And the best route right now is at the International Criminal Court, and we would like to see more investigations, more applications for arrest warrants against all those who have committed or commissioned grave violations, including Hamas leaders.
Following on from that, we've got quite a few questions on the hostage situation. So do you have any insight or any comments on the different treatment of the hostages? I don't mean by the hostage takers, but in terms of the media and the political parties that are discussing it and so forth.
Different treatment. I'm not really sure what that relates to, other than hostage. You know, I will say hostage taking is a war crime, and the civilian hostages must be immediately released. And there are specialist bodies. The ICRC is one of them, and there's obviously diplomats who are also engaged in this. But you know, this is part of the tragedy of the situation, where human beings can be used as bargaining chips. The Israelis are doing it, and Palestinian armed groups are doing it, and that's part of the tragedy. And that's why I talked about those key principles, those key human rights principles, that if we're to have any chance of moving forward, there needs to be that shared agreement that there should be no hostage taking, there should be no arbitrary detention. People shouldn't be subjected to torture. These are, you know, shouldn't be uncontroversial principles, but there's massive rejection of them. So we need to get to that point where there is agreement on core principles before we can even start getting into the more political dimension. So we're not even there yet, but That doesn't mean to say they're wrong. It just means to say we're not there yet. And so we will keep on reiterating that. And as I said, the failure to ensure that core human rights principles were central, and I mentioned Oslo, but it could be any other process or agreement or treaty, has led to where we are now. And there will be more suffering and violence against civilians the longer those principles aren't shared. So that's the hard work that governments, NGOs, wider civil society have to impress upon the parties to the crisis.
I mean, we never thought it would be controversial to get people on board with a ceasefire, but apparently
massively controversial. Exactly. Simple things like a ceasefire, which would unlock the space for more civilian hostages to be released, for more aid to get in, but was opposed quite viciously. Was now's not the right time. The Labour Party, when in opposition, was saying that for weeks. So simple things like that. But now they've come on board. So you've got to keep pushing them. You've got to keep not just taking that principle view, but also pointing out what the negative impacts are of them going slow or rejecting or mocking you or whatever it might be. Justice and accountability is controversial. You're seeing Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor of the ICC, being accused of being an anti-Semite. Aid access, feeding children, feeding babies is controversial. You're seeing UNRWA accused of being terrorists. So the toxicity is absolutely off the scale. And that's why drawing things back to those very simple principles. Everybody has the right to life. This should not be controversial, but amazingly it is. But we will need to keep on making sure that those key principles are promoted.
And how do you keep going when you are faced with, like you say, resistance, mocking, et cetera, et cetera? It's tough, isn't it? It's disheartening.
It can be. It can be if you have a narrow field of view. But, if you stand back and take a more global approach and look at how crises and conflicts have been resolved or near to be resolving around the world, that's part of your evidence. If you look at how the situation with Israelis and Palestinians hasn't been resolved, precisely because these principles, these human rights principles, haven't been central to any negotiations, that's also your evidence. So you're still coming with evidence, if not also just the pure legal and ethical argument. But you need to have some teeth as well. And I think that's important. And we didn't talk too much about complicity. Maybe it'll come up later, but that's it's also important to impress upon, for instance, in the UK, ministers and civil servants and also corporations, that they too could be held to account. And there is work happening on that right now. I won't go into a huge amount of detail here for obvious reasons, but that's also going to be important as well. So you have to keep going. This is not just about Israelis and Palestinians. It's about all of us. And that's why I said this is not just what's happening now is not just an attack on civilians. It's an attack on the very structures of international law, international humanitarian law, rewriting it, rewriting what proportionality and distinction mean. An attack on international justice, the ICC, the ICJ, these are there to protect all of us. So we will keep on impressing upon our government and other governments that there's more at stake than I think maybe they realize.
Yeah, I would actually like to talk about the issue of complicity and such now that you mentioned it. Why should we care as British citizens about this for our government?
Yeah, sure. I'd say the vast majority of people don't care. And the human rights narrative is a minority pursuit. Yeah, most people don't care. They're oblivious to this. It's these people have been killing each other for centuries and they'll keep killing each other for centuries. They don't care. And that can be disheartening. Yeah, that can be. But But things are changing. You know, if you look at how you can make an impact and where you can make an impact, obviously from an Amnesty International perspective, a lot of our work is at the international justice level, and at a national level as well, but at the international justice level. We've seen in the past 6 months or so, massive moves at the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. So, you know, our propositions and campaigns and what have you aren't the general public. They're very targeted. And a lot of the work we're doing is very much focused on decision makers. There is a space for mass movements. There absolutely is. And, you know, our friends at the Palestine Solidarity Campaign have done brilliant work in building a movement and mobilizing a movement. And, you know, that's their space. They're really good at that. And we're supportive of that. And what's interesting on that as well is how the space for supporting Palestinian rights is shrinking and has been shrinking, certainly under the last government, but also to an extent under this government. And that's where Amnesty can come in. That's where our space is to defend the right to peaceful protest, the right to freedom of expression. So I'm not too worried about reaching 60 million people. It's about reaching the right people. And that's where our focus is right now. And I think we've seen some positive progress in this past 6 months or so at the international justice level.
I also like to emphasize to people that it feels very much like they're using the field of Israel and Palestine as a precedent for some worrying policies and restrictions on civil liberties and so forth. So even as a British citizen, if you don't care about the region of Israel-Palestine at all, which obviously lots of people don't, and that's fair enough, but there are some policies that are slipping through that are terrifying, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly draconian policies on protest and on freedom of expression, as I said, which is happening across the board in businesses, in academia. And I think we are seeing, certainly we've seen a lot more people in the past 6 months to a year engage on the Israel-Palestine issue, not necessarily because of Israel-Palestine, but because of the threats to human rights and civil liberties, including theirs. That there's a fundamental matter of unfairness. I also think a lot more people are attuned to the power imbalance of occupier and occupied, the imbalance in terms of systematic discrimination and apartheid. I think more people are aware of that now. Like the two sides narrative is crumbling to an extent, and you're seeing more and more people understanding, including within the NGO space, by the way. You know, we're not one homogenous block, including within the NGO space, having a different and smarter analysis which understands power relations a lot more. I think that's really important as well.
It has felt different this period of time since the most recent escalation of violence, in terms of people's interaction with the discussion, more people wanting to know about what is actually happening and getting more varied opinions, having access to that. So it's definitely a different time, isn't it?
It's been consistently pretty much up there in terms of international news for quite some time now. And I think the whole point, I mentioned double standards as well. I think that's been quite notable as well. For people who are sort of, you know, politically aware, have a basic understanding of sort of foreign policy, can see the different approaches to illegal occupation and annexation from the UK government with regards to Ukraine and with regards to Palestine. You know, when you strip something off the sort of political rhetoric and just talk simply about illegal occupation and annexation, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and how the UK government has interacted with Russia and the coercive measures it's taken on Russia and the support it's given to Ukrainian civilians compared to Israel-Palestine, I see it myself, you know, within the NGO sector and wider civil society. People just think there's a fundamental nonsense there. There's a fundamental disparity and unfairness in terms of the double standards, which is really, really damaging, really, really damaging. So when you see the US administration, as they repeatedly do say, you know, the occupied Syrian Golan belongs to Israel, I'm sure there are policymakers in the Kremlin thinking, great, this is great. You know, we will use this next time a discussion on Crimea comes up. So this is why I say this is not just about Israel, Palestine and civilians there. It's also about the very structures that protect all of us, all civilians around the world. That's why people should care.
Yes, that is. I've got a lovely comment that I want to read from Hazel McCorriskin. I hope I've said that right. She says, "Thank you, Kristyan, for the work your colleagues and yourself do and for your relevant and great information today." So I agree. I just thought it'd be nice to have a little comment there. So we've got a question from Vera Lustig. It's actually 2 questions, but they're fascinating. So I'm gonna pose them to you, and please tell me if it's not within your remit or something you want to comment on. Shouldn't the UK Charities Commission withdraw the charitable status of charities such as the Jewish National Fund, who, to put it in context for those who don't know, often give to projects and programs and so forth in the illegal settlements? Also, is there any way of blocking invitations to Jews like me to take up residence in a settlement?
Well, the International Court of Justice has been very clear in terms of the occupation is illegal, and governments and other entities must not be doing anything to enable their ongoing existence. The settlements must be dismantled, the settlers must be evacuated. So there should be no complicity, no enabling, you know, no investment in settlement trade, no settlement goods coming into the country. That also applies to other entities, individuals, companies, civil society groups. So absolutely, the Charity Commission should be increasing its resources to look at any individual or entity or company that is in any way supporting or enabling an illegal situation. I'm quite confident we'll start to see moves on there. I understand, I've not read the details, I understand something like this has already happened in Canada with the version of the JNF there. So coupled with a much more robust approach from various governments, including the USA, by the way, in terms of its willingness to sanction individual settlers and entities, farms, for instance, and organizations. The UK is doing the same thing, as are the EU and other countries. We're seeing some movement here now. We are seeing some movement. It's not quick enough. It's not deep enough. You know, it doesn't factor in that the settlements are essentially a Israeli state-led initiative. There's no separation between extremist Israeli settlers, as the US and UK like to call them, and the Israeli government. There is no separation there. You can't disentangle them. So that's a dilemma for the US and the UK. But you know, we have the ICJ ruling. Organizations like the JNF are on notice. I'll just say that.
Well, that'll be interesting to follow, and I'm sure we'll keep everyone posted if there's any significant movement. Here I've got a question from Anthony Valiant, because it's a topic that we as a Balfour Project have a clear stance on. We are in favor of the government using the Jerusalem Declaration definition of anti-Semitism as opposed to IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which when applied means you can't criticize the state of Israel, which we feel has nothing to do with being anti-Semitic. Does Amnesty have a view on this?
On the Jerusalem Declaration, yeah, I mean, it's certainly better than the IHRA. We have publicly opposed the adoption of the IHRA for the reasons, you know, you kind of suggested around its negative impact on right to freedom of expression, for instance. So yeah, I mean, the Jerusalem Declaration is better. There's others like the Nexus definition as well, which are better, which people can engage with. We would like to see moves at a more international level, at the UN level, to really enshrine this necessary battle against anti-Semitism. And the IHRA is a hindrance to that, 100%. And I think there's more acceptance and more progressive minded people towards the Jerusalem Declaration. So if you haven't come across that, anyone listening, yeah, do check it out. It's not necessarily something Amnesty promotes, but we do acknowledge that it has its benefits, certainly when compared to the IHRA.
We've got a couple of questions about the roles of international of other countries, basically, the international community. Quite a few people saying, can the UK do anything? What would their role be, especially in relation to the US? Are they not the main broker that might be able to get some significant movement? And also the role of the European countries. We've had a lot more significant statements of support coming out of other countries, for example.
Yeah, they have obviously legal and ethical responsibilities, the UK. And one thing I will say, though, when we talk about the international community, we do need to look wider. And I think the South African government have put a marker down in terms of what a government can do and what positive impact for civilians and for peace and justice it can have when it invests in an approach. So, for instance, the case at the ICJ and other diplomatic moves at the General Assembly, which hopefully we'll see some more moves on that when the General Assembly starts up again this year. So the international community is wider than the US, the UK, and EU. And we must recognize that. But certainly the UK has its obligations. And again, the ICJ has been very clear, very categorical in terms of what the obligations are under international law for all states, the UK included. And you know, there's some basic things which the new UK government have already done, and I touched on some of those already, like taking the pause off UNRWA. You know, not going ahead with the ludicrous stunt from the last government against the ICC's jurisdiction with regards to arrest warrants. So we've seen that pulled. But as I said, there is more they can do to de-link themselves, to end their complicity. The obvious one is to stop the arms transfers. That's the really obvious one that we want to see some progress on, and you know, it has to be in full. We will be keeping an eye, if there is to be an announcement, we will be keeping an eye on any exceptions and loopholes and looking to challenge those as well. We are, by the way, part of this judicial review against the government that Al-Haq, leading Palestinian human rights organization, Al-Haq, have taken the UK government to court. That will be starting up again on the 8th of October. So we're part of that as well. We've submitted evidence to that case as well.
We will be having a webinar later on
Perfect.
on that topic to
brilliant. On that. And then, you know, obviously things like banning Israeli settlement goods are really obvious ones. But, you know, these are symptoms of a crisis. Stand back and, you know, if there is to be some sort of comprehensive peace process, it's, as I said in my talk, learn from the mistakes of the past 30 odd years, learn from the mistakes of Oslo, and there were many, many mistakes. The central one being the failure to ensure human rights principles were absolutely central, and to craft agreements based on the shared security of Israelis and Palestinians, not just in the interest of one party and in the hope that you could design some sort of indigenous sort of Palestinian organization that is just there as an offshoot of the occupation, because that's what we've really essentially had for 3 decades.
Totally unsustainable.
that can
Yeah.
support an occupation and ongoing annexation. That process has to end. That has to end.
We've had a couple of questions on the topic of sort of biased media, misinformation on social media, et cetera, et cetera. So we've had a few people ask in different ways where they can get their information from. Where do you recommend that is a trusted site? Obviously, Amnesty International and the Balfour Project.
And Balfour, obviously. Yeah, I mean, you know, it depends what you're looking for. I really wouldn't be here talking about promoting any external media sites. I can talk about Amnesty, and you can get you can look at Amnesty's website, and ours is a narrow view compared to all the different views that, for instance, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, will be receiving. Yeah, there'll be views with regards to trade and investment, security, intelligence sharing, so many other elements within the wider strategy that the new government will be taking forward. And human rights would be compartmentalized. And what we're saying is that's a mistake. It's not security or human rights. There is no security without human rights. You need to have a holistic approach to everything, including to trade and investment. You need to have effective due diligence to make sure that your trade and investment is not compounding the problem. And that's why we're saying you need to ban Israeli settlement goods. That element of your trade and investment policy where you're not banning them is ensuring the settlements are expanding. It's an illegal situation. It's entrenching violations and apartheid and the illegal occupation and annexation. So you need to ensure that that human rights framework is part of everything. We would say that, obviously, and there'll be other groups who will say, don't be silly. And that's the argument, that's the issue. But like I said, if the point is we want peace and justice, and I did say right at the very beginning, not everybody does. So we need to reflect on that as well. It's fine to say there needs to be peace, but there are many, many powerful individuals and entities working against peace. We need to factor that in as well.
Yeah, I have to say one of the hardest moments for me as a Palestinian Brit living here was when we had certain government ministers discussing whether international law should even apply to Gaza, and it's quite heartbreaking. So I think we moved on a bit since then, which is good.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. I want to point out that on our website, we have a lesser known section that I think is one of our most interesting sections, actually. It's underneath, if you go to our website, it's in the positions tab. And we keep an updated sort of list of questions in Parliament about this Israel-Palestine. So that's a really good place to get an idea of what is being discussed in Parliament with regards to a whole bunch of issues to do with Israel-Palestine. And we are by no means a news source at the Balfour Project, but we do like to share articles that we find interesting, as well as book reviews and so forth. So if you're not already on a mailing list, do sign up. We do try to share them. We will be sending out an email fairly shortly about the updates on our action plan. Some of the points that Kristyan has been talking about that have had some movement since we launched our action plan in June at our conference. So we'll be sending an email out about that as well. And we will also be putting a recording, video recording, as well as audio recording of this webinar up on our website, up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. So please do share this with anyone that you think will be interested. We also put all of our past webinars on our website as well. I've got time for a couple of questions, and I always try to end on a lighter note, or at least a more optimistic, hopeful note. It's hard sometimes, but we're going to try. Lika Nahal asks, could we have some examples of successful peacemaking in other past conflicts? No.
Yeah, it is important to be optimistic. I know I myself, I did say we can look, when we take a global view, we can look at how ensuring human rights principles are necessary. I will also say that each crisis or conflict has its own dynamics. Yeah. And so I don't necessarily want to talk about other crises or conflicts because the world is so unsteady right now. And, I might look back at this webinar in a year and think, oh my God, I can't believe I said Colombia, for instance, was a good example, because maybe in a year's time it's kicked off again. So I'd caution against that. I would talk about the principles, as I mentioned, and then how that applies to this particular dynamic, because the religious, the cultural, the political claims, they're very, very particular to this particular crisis. So I don't want to cop out. So I just don't want to get myself into an issue where I've said something is a good example and then it blows up again. I think we lost you, by the way, Diana. Yeah, did we? Okay.
Yes, you did. A plane went over my house and cut out my internet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I live next to Heathrow. But I'm back. So I have no idea what you said, but I'm sure it was amazing. I'm going to go to our last question.
Answer.
But before I go to the last question, I just want to pop in the chat box our donation link, because we do all these webinars for free, but we would greatly appreciate some any support that you can give. We also have a link to become a friend of the Balfour Project, which means that you get discounted or free tickets to some of our paid events. And we also have exclusive events specifically for our friends of the Balfour Project. You also have access to hard copies of some of our documents, such as the conference summary report that we are now putting out, and so forth. So I've popped the links in the chat box. I will also pop in the chat box a link to where you can see all of our past events, because we have had some amazing speakers. So please do share them far and wide. Watch the ones that you haven't seen already. And we've got loads of comments coming in, loads of people thanking you for your amazing talk. So I would like us to end on the question about, it's come from Stephen Fleming, but a few people have asked it in different ways. What can we as ordinary UK citizens do to help ensure our governments respect international law?
Yeah, good question. There's multiple ways people can engage. At a basic level, it could be making sure that MPs are mobilized, and starting with your own MP, and communicating with them on those immediate needs that I already mentioned, supporting international justice, including rulings and opinions from the International Court of Justice, and that commitment to act on any ICC arrest warrant without discrimination against Israelis or Palestinians. That's really crucial. Really, really crucial one, ending the complicity. So calling on your MP to impress upon the Foreign Secretary and the Trade Secretary to suspend arms directly and indirectly to Israel. These are really, really crucial ones as well. If people want to go further, they can talk about things like banning Israeli settlement goods and what have you. There's lots of other organizations, not just Amnesty, Balfour as well, PSE, MAP, lots of others, where you can do quite simple things, in terms of donating to the humanitarian cause. Obviously, that on its own isn't going to bring about peace and security and justice. It must be the more substantial points, the principles that I was mentioning earlier. But keep talking about it. Inform yourself with the facts. In reference to one of the previous questions, I would usually go to the source. So when I say, sort of jokingly, go to amnesty.org, do that, but also read what's on the ICC website, the press releases, read what's on the ICJ website, the press releases, the briefings, even the findings, even though they're quite long. Read UN reports. These are the sort of unfiltered facts, the statistics, in a sea of opinion and counterclaim and claim and just horrible dehumanizing rhetoric and nonsense. Going to the actual source, educating yourself, and then investing that time in lobbying efforts, I think is, MPs need to hear that. They need to hear that this is an issue. From there, there's so much more you can do in terms of joining protests and stunts and getting on the local media and whatever. But I think it starts at that grassroots advocacy level. I think that's really, really important.
We regularly do email your MP campaigns, as do other organizations. It's really handy to sort of spoon feed them the information they need to take the cause further, make it as easy as possible for them to speak on the subject and have the evidence that they might need in order to convince people to move forward on something. So do keep an eye out for any trusted organizations doing any kind of email your MP campaigns. I have also wanted to mention that there are some good sites such as UN OCHA that have OPT OCHA that have sort of stats, up-to-date stats on what's going on, not just in Gaza, in the West Bank and so forth. So that's another good one if you need to get any information like that. So now it is time to thank Kristyan so much for your talk. I know you are super busy at the moment with everything that's going on, so we're really, really grateful for you taking the time to come out and talk to us. I want to thank everyone who's come along to watch you live and all the people watching the recording and listening to the audio. And do keep an eye out for any future events and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much, Kristyan.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me, and thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. Have a lovely evening.